How you doing, Dana?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Did any of the names I sent to you ring a bell?
Oh yeah, they all rang a bell. Actually, I mean,
Okay.
I've met a couple. Interviewed one, but um, I'm aware of everybody that's on the list. Of course.
Yeah, because who did we mention? Marlon Brando? Was he on your list?
Brando is on my list. That's
Okay.
absolutely true. Yes, yeah.
All right. Who was the other? Cary Grant?
Cary Grant, Gregory Peck, whom I had the privilege of interviewing.
Oh,
Jose
okay.
Ferrer was also there, and I think Susan Hayward.
Oh, wow. So you got everybody. Well,
Yeah, well, they sent me a list.
that's good. That's good. Academy Award month. Oscar night is coming up, and the Film Detective will be showing just busloads of Oscar nominated movies. We have
A lot of good
so
films.
many.
Yeah.
We have Cary sent me a list. It's something like 60 60 movies that have either been nominated for an Oscar or won an Oscar. One of them, which I really like, is with Marlon Brando from 1961. It was One-Eyed Jacks.
Marlon Brando is a bank robber out for revenge in One-Eyed Jacks, a penetrating and offbeat Western from 1961.
We'll be showing that movie.
Quirky
It was
film.
nominated. What's that?
I knew you'd like that movie.
I do. And it was nominated for cinematography, and a lot of interesting stories behind that movie. It was supposedly 4 or 5 hours long at one point. Brando was directing. He got out of hand, over budget, got in big trouble with the powers that be. They whittled it down to about what is it now, 2.5 hours or something. It's a healthy movie. It's a long movie.
It's a long movie.
Yeah, but
it's funny about
one.
him that he was always in trouble, though. And
yeah,
the major thing to remember about Marlon Brando was he didn't care that he was in trouble. I mean, he looked for trouble and he tried to be trouble. I mean, in one respect, certainly one of the finest film actors that ever lived. In another respect, he was incredibly self-destructive. I mean, from the very, very beginning. I mean, my favorite story about Marlon Brando was at the beginning of his career. Now, he had been doing this kind of on-the-road thing with Tallulah Bankhead, who thought he was, a really good actor, but he was terrible on stage. And, she said, as long as you were standing next to him, you might be able to understand what he was saying. But in the back of a theater, you could never understand it, which makes perfect sense. And Brando himself said about the theater, unless you yell, people don't think you're acting. So, as you know, in his certainly in his film roles, he mumbled a lot. And he was certainly, that's not what you do in theater. You need to project a little. But it was really funny that he had started doing this play, and eventually Bankhead fired him. But along comes this Tennessee Williams play that's about to hit Broadway, and they need a cast. And they were trying to get John Garfield to do A Streetcar Named Desire. And Garfield said he didn't want to, he wasn't crazy about the play, and he certainly didn't want to be on Broadway if it was a hit for any long period of time, because his film career was doing very well. So they had to, they're still trying to get him. They went for a long time to try and convince Garfield to take the role. They even were, on the verge of saying, well, we'll make sure that you get the film role if there's a film role made from the play. And he still said no, that he wasn't going to do it. So anyway, they went looking for somebody, and Elia Kazan, of course, who was directing, thought Brando would be right for the role. So he insisted the producers bring him in and that they audition him. So the first thing they had to do was find him. Now, he had just come off this, this play that had been fired on with Tallulah Bankhead. He had no phone. He had nobody knew where he was. And they literally had to put it out on the street with other actors to say, we need Brando to come in to audition for this new Broadway play that I think that he's perfect for. Well, Brando finally, they finally got a hold of him, and he came in and he auditioned for it. But the producers were still saying, hey, you know what? We still want Garfield. If we can get John Garfield, that's the guy that we need to play this. And they said that you can't get John Garfield. I'll tell you what, suppose he auditions for Tennessee Williams, and Tennessee Williams says he's right for the role. So they finally agreed. They said, okay, if Tennessee says he's right for the role, then he can play it, and we'll back him in Streetcar Named Desire. So then he goes to Marlon and he says, okay, Tennessee Williams was hanging out in some backwoods place in the Carolinas. And they said, you have to go down and see Tennessee Williams and audition for him. And he said, I don't have any money. I have no money. So he said, his lawyer goes down and said, okay, look, here's the money for a bus ticket. Get down there, audition, as quick as you can, get down there and audition for Tennessee Williams, and then get back to us, right? Or he'll get back to us. So he leaves him, Brando takes off, and the next thing Brando does is he takes the money for the bus ticket and he buys booze for a party at Maureen Stapleton's apartment. Right? He doesn't even get out of it. Now, can you imagine this? Here's a young actor that doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together, and he gets a chance to star on Broadway in this Tennessee Williams play. And he takes the money for the bus ticket and just goes and buys booze and goes to his friend Maureen Stapleton's apartment, and they have a party.
And after that, it was just, rosemary and sweet whiskey and just whooping and yelling.
Right. So Elia Kazan is still, you got to give him credit. He hears about it, and he's angry about it, but he brings me back and he said, you have got to get down and talk to Tennessee Williams. This is nuts. So he agrees to do that. And this time he buys him the bus ticket and makes sure he gets on the bus. Well, he goes down to see Tennessee Williams. And this, again, he was in kind of he had a whole bunch of artists, as he always did around him, of course. And they were staying at this cabin thing in the woods. And he gets there and there's no power. So it's dark inside the cabin. And the bathroom apparently has been shut down. And everybody in there is an artist and has no idea how to fix anything. But here comes Brando, who has done about every possible odd job there is. He walks in, he fixes the lights, he fixes the John, and everybody is stunned that this man can do all these things. And he winds up and he gets the part. And of course, the rest is history. That is the part that made him that in the subsequent movie. But that's an extraordinary, and he continued being that self-destructive throughout his career. It's amazing. He once addressed it, believe it or not, because it was hard to interview Brando because he never took anything very seriously, especially later in his career. But he addressed it once by saying he hated his father. His father was a drunk. His mother was a drunk too, but he gave her a little more slack. And he used to pick her up off barroom floors, he said. So he was always kind of looking for love. And so as a result of that, he always struck out. He got thrown out of high school for riding his motorcycle in the halls of high school. They sent him to military school to straighten him out. And then, his stories of working with driving directors crazy. And yet they kept insisting on working with him because he was such a remarkable actor, incredibly remarkable actor. There's also a story about him that I love this story too, that, he studied with Stella Adler. And, of course, he's known to the Stanislavski Method. He was the first actor, actually, that was studied under the Stanislavski, made it big anyway, as a method actor, as they call them now. And that's when you internalize everything. Everything comes internally first and then externally. it's all. And some of the exercises that they use in order to teach this method get pretty bizarre to the, unenlightened or the, uninterested, I guess. Well, one time he's in one of these classes and she tells everybody to, okay, you're all chickens and there's going to be a nuclear bomb dropped on you. So everybody started clucking around. All the students started clucking around frantically, chaotically, scared to death of the nuclear bomb that's coming. And Brando's just sitting there, right? He says, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm laying an egg." I said, "Well, wait a minute. There's a nuclear bomb is going to," and he said, "I'm a chicken. I don't know anything about nuclear bombs." So I mean, that's he was always the guy that was trying to do something different, always the guy that was doing everything. But it was, very frustrating for a lot of actors. I mean, in a number of his movies, and Robert Duvall told me this, James Caan told me this. They loved this man. They loved working with him, and they had a great time with him because everything was a joke. I mean, these guys, they had a mooning contest at The Godfather, apparently, in Godfather 1 that drove Coppola crazy. But that's the way these guys were. But they said they would have to literally tape dialogue to other actors so that he knew what his next line was, because he refused to learn lines. He would rather improvise everything, which drives everybody crazy. And it's really hard to improvise around other actors who've learned their lines. If everybody's improvising, it's one thing, but if other actors have learned their lines and one guy is improvising, it's a nightmare. Crazy. He's just crazy. He was crazy, but man, was he talented.
Well, one of the reasons that One-Eyed Jacks went so over budget was because Brando decided that his character was drunk in a bunch of scenes. So he went out and got drunk every day before they shot. And
that's the method. Yeah.
And the method, the method to his madness. But of course, he was so drunk, he, talk about not knowing his lines. He couldn't perform. He was too drunk. So they had to, end the shooting for that day. And before you know it, they were 2 weeks behind schedule after 2 days. He just could not stick to the schedule. But I love that movie. It's playing on Tuesday, March 1st, to kick off our.
That's definitely your kind of movie. That's definitely your kind of movie.
Well, it's an interesting mix because it sort of combines what Brando was really good at, those sort of gritty, moody kind of characters, but he directed it with a real flourish. There's a lot of colorful lighting and skylines, the Old West, big sky country. He was doing things nobody thought Brando could do. And at the time, the movie was not well received. It wasn't the big hit he was hoping for, because he wanted to direct more often and he wanted to establish himself as a sort of independent film producer. But this was not the kind of movie that could make that happen, because he wasted the budget and he ended up in debt to Paramount and Universal. Universal said, "We'll pay off the money that you owe, but you have to act in 4 or 5 movies." And so he spent 3 or 4 years making those 5 movies for Universal, and that was not his best period of time. But over the years, a lot of directors have come forward and expressed a lot of admiration for One-Eyed Jacks. Coppola, Scorsese, a lot of the big name directors, they say that Brando, he hit a bullseye with that one and it went unappreciated. But we'll be showing that one. And boy, our list of Oscar movies, we're showing A Farewell to Arms, Of Human Bondage, Algiers, Cyrano de Bergerac.
Great movie. I love that movie. I was actually,
Farrar.
I was a very young man, a boy, I think, when I saw that movie. And I really have to say that was one of the movies that really got me interested in movies. I mean, really kind of obsessed with film. In fact, the dialogue in that movie is unbelievable, but Jose Ferrer in that movie and his You talk about tour de force, you know, that expression that is
Mhm.
really overused, I think, in a lot of his performance in that movie is a tour de force. I mean, he just takes stage and, you know, just take and wallops everybody in that movie.
Well, tell me, why are you staring at my nose?
Oh, I was not staring.
Does it astonish you?
Why, no, I've been careful not to look.
Oh, and why not, if you please? It disgusts you then?
But no, I
Does
never...
its color appear to you unwholesome?
By no means.
Possibly you find it just a trifle large.
No, small, very small, tiny, infinitesimal.
What? You accuse me of absurdity? Small, my nose? Why, magnificent, my nose. You pug, you knob, you button head. Know that I glory in this nose of mine. For a great nose indicates a great man.
And I mean, he loved the film, always did, of course. And he used to say that Cyrano was a star maker for anybody. He was a very humble man, but an incredibly accomplished man as well. But I always loved Cyrano. You know, the story of the requited love. You know, this man who saw himself as hopelessly in love with this woman. Of course, it really was a Cyrano. It really was a Roxanne, which is one of the reasons why he always said that he would never. He was always told, because he did a lot of television later on, Jose Ferrer, and a lot of variety shows when they were big then in the 60s. And he used to say that I won't do anything that disparages that character, not because he didn't have a great sense of humor, because he did. Actually, everybody says what a great and funny man he actually was. But he said some reason that because Cyrano was a real person, that he wanted to, you know, the dignity of that character was very important to him. I mean, Jimmy Durante wanted him to do something, you know, the schnoz and the schnoz, you know, together, and he refused to do it. He just said, no, I can't do that. But he did a lot of funny stuff. I remember as a kid, remember the Ed Sullivan Show?
Mhm.
Now, you probably don't remember the Ed Sullivan Show, but
Well,
you know,
I remember the legend.
yeah. Well, I remember a little about it. I mean, I was at that old, but those were the days, of course, there were like 2 television stations in the market, and you literally, Boston anyway, and literally you watched everything with your parents. I mean, there was, you know, 1 TV, 2 television stations. So I always watched the Ed Sullivan Show. I have a lot of memories. I remember the plate guy and the Ed Sullivan Show. And,
Yeah.
I remember, I remember all that stuff. And I remember seeing him one day ride a horse. Jose Ferrer riding a horse on the Ed Sullivan Show up to Ed Sullivan, and then they kind of did this Shakespearean retort to each other. It went back and forth with it, which was really strange to see Ed Sullivan doing it. But he had that stentorian voice, you know, Jose Ferrer. He was an amazing man and a very, very bright guy.
Did Sullivan get on the horse?
No,
That would be
not.
something.
No, he did not. You know, Ferrer was one of those guys that it really appeared that he wasn't afraid of anything. I mean, it's why he was able to do those roles. I mean, remember him in the Caine Mutiny? I mean, that
Yes,
role in
the
Caine
attorney.
Mutiny where, yeah, I mean, he's their lawyer. They win, and suddenly he turns around, he throws a drink in Fred McMurray's face. You know, you want to do something about it, I'll be outside. You know? He had this demeanor about him. But I think as a man himself, he would never be intimidated by anyone. First Latin actor, by the way, to get an Academy Award, and the first one ever to get a Tony as well.
That's right. He played Cyrano on stage for, you know, I think more than 500 performances. I think it was one of those shows that just went, and then I think he revived it after the movie came out years later. I think he brought it back.
He did, and I think there was some teledrama that he did that I can't remember, but he won an Emmy for it. So I mean, he's the only actor, I believe, to ever win, you know, a Tony and an Oscar and an Emmy for a single role. That was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's probably why he felt so close to the part and would not want to do anything to demean it. When you play a character that many times, you know, imagine that, you know, 500 nights plus, you go out there wearing the nose and reciting the poetry, you know, that is bound to cement you into the role.
Yeah, he only watched the movie once, he said.
Mhm.
And he would never watch it again. And he said the reason was that every time he watched the movie, now it's funny because, as you said, he did this hundreds of times on stage in this film. And he would say, I only watched the movie once because I would think, why didn't I do this? And why didn't I do that? Why did I move over here? Why didn't I read that line like this? He said it was torturous to watch, thinking how he could, do things differently. Amazing. I heard Gene Hackman.
That's how I am with these little clips we do. I never watch them.
Well, you
I'll
certainly
pick
give
apart
yourself
my
a break with
performance.
these. Yeah, give yourself a break with these. But I remember Gene Hackman one time. I was scheduled to interview him the next day, but we were watching the screening in New York, and it was in a big theater. So there weren't very many people in it. There were just the press in it, but they couldn't get a screening room somewhere. So they actually did it in a real theater in New York. And there weren't that many people in the theater, but I always like to sit towards the back of the theater anyway. And it was Mississippi Burning was the movie.
Oh,
So I'm watching, a really great movie. And I'm watching the movie, and all of a sudden you see the shadow come in after the first 5 or 10 minutes. And across the aisle from me, Gene Hackman sits in the back. He comes in and sits in the back. Now he stays there for about, 5 or 10 minutes. And then he gets up and he leaves, right? Never to come back again. And the next day, I was scheduled to interview him around 2:00 in the afternoon or whatever. And I walked in and I said, I was sitting across from you when you walked in the theater, walking. And I said, what's it like to see yourself, 30 feet high? And he said, and I said, and you left early. You didn't want to watch the rest of the movie. How come you want to do that? He said, because all I do is sit there and think, who in the hell would watch this bald fat man do anything? So actors are incredibly critical of themselves on screen. And so, of course, was Jose Ferrer. Anybody who's done anything, any amateur theater or anything, even when you do 1 or 2 performances, or, you're always struck for, a little while later when you're remembering the dialogue. Oh, why didn't I say it that way? Oh, I could have said, you really do kind of inhabit that role for a little while. So just think of people who do roles like Cyrano de Bergerac and iconic roles and how they must feel. So that's why I only watched it once.
And you think about Brando, he never really went back to the stage, did he?
No.
After he did Streetcar, he just went to the
I
movie.
told you, he thought unless you're yelling on stage, nobody thinks you're acting, is what he said.
Yeah, so he was one and done, as they say. He
was one and done. That's right.
One and done. Now, what can you tell us about Gregory Peck? Because we're showing the Snows of Kilimanjaro.
Snows of Kilimanjaro, yes.
Yeah, that's one of our Oscar-nominated movies on our list. Did you meet him?
Oh, yes. Yes, I had a wonderful interview with Gregory Peck. It's amazing that, a lot of these things, because a lot of the interviews I did were kind of film junkets. They were films that had 30, 40 people that were interviewing stars at the same time. And not always, but sometimes. And this was for Old Gringo. It was for his role in Old Gringo.
Is that about 85, 86?
Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood, right. And I was really looking forward to interviewing him because To Kill a Mockingbird is my favorite film overall. And I thought, he did a tremendous job in it, as most everybody else does too. So you walk in the room normally, and these actors they don't get up every time. They've got their mics on, they've got the lights are in there, and so they don't really get up, say hello to you, sit down, and you shake hands with them, you sit down and say hello. I walked in that room with him, and he got up. He stood up and walked over to the door. His mic's hanging on like this, right? Walks over the door and sticks his hand and says, "Hello, I'm Gregory Peck." You say to yourself, "I know that." It's like, so anyway, we sat there, we started to talk, and I just had the greatest time with him. I went way over time with him. He kept talking about all the movies that he was in, and he told me the greatest story about To Kill a Mockingbird. Harper Lee, who won the Pulitzer Prize, of course, for the book, never wanted him to play the role of her father, Atticus Finch, in that movie, because she felt he didn't look like her father, and it wasn't right. So one day he's doing the movie and he's filming the scenes. One day he looks up and Harper Lee has been let on the set, which is something unusual. They normally don't let writers on set. But if you don't believe me, read William Goldman's Adventures in the Script Trade. They just don't like writers to be around when they're making the movie. But anyway, she's there and she's between, you know, a couple of cameras. And he's doing a particularly, he didn't tell me what the scene was, but emotional scene. There's a few of them in that film. So he finishes the scene and he looks over and there's Harper Lee and she's crying. And he said to me, he said, "Dana, you have to realize as an actor, there's nothing more gratifying than somebody who's that close to the material who is crying because of your performance." So I got up, I walked over to her, I threw my arms around her, and I said, "Harper, you have to tell me, I got to tell you how much this really means to me that you're coming to see me do this movie and that I've touched you somehow." And she looked up at me and she said, "You got a little pot belly just like my daddy." He loved that. He loved that story. That meant the world to him. "You got a little pot belly just like my daddy."
Now, did he have much to say about Snows of Kilimanjaro, or did he leave that one in the past?
I don't think we ever talked about Snows of Kilimanjaro, but actually, I think he did mention that, you know, most of the movie's on his back. So, he didn't consider, well, I mean, most of the movie's in flashbacks too. So there's a lot of acting that's done on his feet. But, you know, it's about a guy who, you know, he injures himself in near Kilimanjaro, and he's dying of gangrene as a result of pricking himself with a briar or something. And Susan Hayward's in that film, as a matter of fact. She plays his wife, Helen. And anyway, I think that he just, you know, it wasn't one of his favorite movies because he was on his back most of the time. But he was an amazing man. I mean, just a wonderful human being, you know. And it's funny about that, you know, so many of these guys, you know, like Jose Ferrer wasn't going to be an actor either. Ferrer wasn't going to be an actor either. And he just kind of fell into it. And so did Gregory Peck. And the interesting thing about him was he hurt his back. Now, here's something he did tell me too, because there's a story that is going around that Gregory Peck he was at Berkeley and he was on a rowing team at Berkeley and he hurt his back and when he was rowing on this rowing team and he couldn't do sports anymore. And so he wound up doing theater at Berkeley, which got him interested in doing, being an actor and going to acting schools. So he told me that's not how it happened. And he said he's been trying to debunk that for years and years when I was talking to him. He said, it really happened. This is unbelievable. It really happened when I studied with Martha Graham. Martha Graham taught him how to dance. And the contortions that he was doing would apparently wrenched his back permanently. He had a chronic back condition as a result. But some studio executive, when they were writing his bio, felt that we better make it a little more manly than him dancing, you know. Not that it's not manly to dance. I'm just saying that was their perception, you know. He wanted literally to make him look a little more masculine because and make it happen in a way that, you know, happened because he was, you know, rowing and everything. So that's how that story got started. But he said it wasn't true. It was really dancing with Mark Graham. But what happened as a result of that injury, he was 25 when the war started, 1941, at least when America got in World War II. He was 25. He was at prime age. And most actors, a lot older than he was in Hollywood, were going into the Army. They were either going to be drafted in the Army or they were enlisting.
Oh, yeah,
Most
all the big names, Gable, Jimmy Stewart.
Names. Well, most of them were enlisting, and they weren't being drafted. They were actually enlisting in the Army. And he was going to do that too, but the back injury prevented him from doing that. They didn't want it. So as a result of that, here's this really good-looking guy with this great voice, and he can act. And so as a result of that, not that he didn't deserve it, you know, he could hold his own with anybody, I think. But he wound up getting his career started perhaps earlier because all the other guys were in the war.
Yeah, there were a few other guys like that. I think Van Johnson was another one who benefited from a lot of those big names were suddenly unavailable. And Van Johnson was probably around the same age. Another guy in his
probably
early to mid 20s.
right.
He started getting roles that he may not have gotten if the bigger names were around.
That's true.
Yeah. And there was a lot of drama in Hollywood when the war ended because all of those big names were coming back and the jury was out. Are these guys like Gregory Peck and Van Johnson, are they going to keep working, or are they going to just fall back in line while the big names take over where they left off?
Well, they both kept working, didn't they? And certainly Gregory Peck kept working.
Yeah, and Van Johnson, we have one of his movies during Oscar month too. We have I want to read just some of the movies that we have. They're available on the app. If you don't see them on our schedule, they're also available on the app. We have Gulliver's Travels, one of the great animated films, a real groundbreaker as far as animation. We have A Star Is Born, the original, with Frederick March, Janet Gaynor. We have a bunch of James Cagney movies that will be playing on St. Patrick's Day as well. We have Royal Wedding with Fred Astaire. That's another one.
Great movie, by the way.
It is. And
a great movie.
Sounder, of course, one a film detective
right.
favorite. And the old Jungle Book with Sabu. That's one of my favorites.
Wow.
Penny Serenade.
Cary Grant, yes.
That's a great one. Did you do much with Cary Grant during your junkets? Was he still working?
No, a little before my time. Before I was interviewing movie stars, he was not around. He retired fairly early anyway. He didn't think it was early. I mean, he wanted to retire earlier than he actually did. But he's my favorite actor of all time, and I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way about him. Just an extraordinary actor. I mean, Ian Fleming, actually, that was his inspiration for Bond's character. You know that?
I was thinking,
yeah. And they actually asked Cary Grant to be the first Bond in Dr. No. But by that time, he was well into his late 50s. And he said, "Nah, I think I'm too old for it." Which he sometimes said yes and sometimes said no about,
Yeah, I also heard David Niven was considered for one.
Yes, yes, he was. That's right. Yeah.
I don't know.
I've talked to a lot of people about Cary Grant who worked with Cary Grant. One of whom was Sophia Loren, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
He pursued Sophia Loren. I mean, Sophia Loren, I think, was probably the only woman that ever turned him down. I mean, I think he had a relationship with her, but he was married, and Carlo Ponti she married Carlo Ponti eventually. But when they made Houseboats, when Cary Grant was making Houseboats with Sophia Loren, he wanted her, to continue to go out with him. They had a relationship before, and she kept saying no. Now she was only, I think, when they made Houseboat, in her 20s, in her mid 20s, and he again was, 50 anyway, over 50, I think. But and Carlo Ponti was no spring chicken either, by the way. He was in his late 40s, I guess. But anyway, she claimed that she was in love with Carlo Ponti and told him that, and he wouldn't believe it. It's hard to believe that Cary Grant had to pursue anyway. But they both ended up divorcing their wives at the same time. And both of them, about the same time, asked Sophia Loren to marry them. And she chose Carlo Ponti instead of Cary Grant. But that's like the only woman, I think, that really ever got to him. But yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
And then he met Diane Cannon, and
all
was well.
Had his first child at 62. Wow, with Diane Cannon. Imagine that. That's pretty amazing. You got to give a guy a hand for that, I think.
Diane Cannon had her charms. Had she already made the movie with Natalie Wood and what was that? Bob Carroll, Ted and Alice.
Right, Bob Carroll, Ted and Alice.
Had she already made that movie?
I
by the
don't
time they
know.
got married?
That's a good question. I think so, but I don't really know, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's amazing. But I mean, Arsenic and Old Lace, Bringing Up Baby, the Philadelphia Story, Notorious, The Awful Truth, To Catch a Thief, Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House. That is my favorite Cary Grant movie. I mean, I don't know, most people say North by Northwest or Notorious or one of the Hitchcock films, but I just love Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House. I think it's just an amazing film. It's so funny. And I always give that movie a copy. So to this day, I give a copy of that movie to any of my friends who are building houses.
Oh, yeah.
Because of course, because he plays a Madison executive that leaves New York, his squalid little apartment in New York, and with his wife and 2 kids, and decides he's going to commute from Connecticut. So they buy a house, and eventually they have to tear the house down because the house gets condemned. They have to build a house, and there's all these problems with building the house. So I always give a copy of it because it's still relevant today. Believe me, just the figures change, but it's just amazing. I just love that movie. Still do.
Yeah,
I was looking for it the other day.
I'm partial to His Girl Friday.
His Girl Friday, the screwball classic that made newsrooms funny. This terrific film was loosely based on the popular Broadway hit, The Front Page, and is one of the most revered comedies in cinema history.
Yeah, very funny movie.
Yeah,
the dialogue in that movie is just boy.
Yeah. He was funny in a way that a lot of actors they can't be funny that way. He was
funny, sexy.
Well, you know,
yeah.
He was physical. He could do physical comedy if you needed him to do a pratfall or something. He could do it.
Absolutely. Well, he was an acrobat.
He could make a funny face if you needed one. You know, he could do a little bit of everything. You know, and with dialogue, he was brilliant. So I'm fond of that one, His Girl Friday. I like that a lot. You know, we were talking about Marlon Brando a while ago, and one of our other Oscar movies that we're showing was nominated for the musical score is The Man with the Golden Arm, which stars Sinatra. And apparently Brando really wanted that role. Did you ever hear that story?
I know that there was kind of a healthy rivalry between Frank Sinatra and Marlon Brando, which seems odd on its surface, but there always was. Each one had digs to say about the other. So maybe that was at the bottom of that. I don't know.
It is interesting because also for a while Sinatra was being considered for the role of Terry Malloy in On the Waterfront.
Right, that's true. Yes.
You know, and it's so funny that Brando, the great actor, and Sinatra, who was a singer who did some acting, they were really kind of competing for the same roles for a few years. And to me, that's kind of interesting that Sinatra was held in that kind of esteem, where they thought, well, if we can't get Brando, we'll get Sinatra, you know.
Well, I think Sinatra had proven that he could act by that point.
Well, he had won the Oscar, I think, for From Here to Eternity. So he was not just doing song and dance routines with Gene Kelly.
No, and he had that Hoboken street smarts that probably was, made them think of him for On the Waterfront. So I don't know, but it is interesting. You don't really think of them as the same kind of actor, do you? I mean, you don't. You know?
Yeah, it would be like if Robert De Niro was competing with Elvis for roles or something. You know, it's kind of bizarre. But Brando really wanted that role that Sinatra got in The Man with the Golden Arm. And now I had heard that the director, Otto Preminger, he wanted Sinatra from the start. And Sinatra was kind of on the fence. He was thinking about it. Brando started calling Preminger, saying, I have to have that role. I want it, you know. And Preminger was, stalling Brando, hoping Sinatra would come through. And finally, Sinatra got a hold of the script because I think maybe he'd read the book and had not yet seen the script. He was hemming and hawing, taking his time. Finally, when he got a hold of the script, he contacted Preminger, and and said,
I'm going to do it.
yeah, I'll do it. Nobody else can do it. I'm the guy, you know. And I like that movie a lot too. We're showing that one showing later in the month.
These are good movies. Wow.
Yeah, I had a chance to see it fairly recently. It's just got a little bit of everything. What I like about that one is even though the subject matter is very realistic with drug addiction, you know, guy coming out of rehab trying to start his career in music, and it's very gritty. But when you look at the set, you know, it looks like a set that was built for a Gene Kelly movie, and you can almost picture Gene Kelly sort of tap dancing around on this thing. You know?
I've never heard anybody say that, but I guess you're right about that, actually.
Yeah, it has that very studio setting. It doesn't look like a realistic backdrop, but yet,
right.
You know, you see Frank Sinatra having his drug withdrawals, and it's a very grueling kind of movie to sit through. But I like that one a lot. We'll be showing that later in the month. Let me just wrap up a few things. We're also going to be celebrating Carl Reiner's birthday. And we'll be showing
nice man.
We'll be showing
really
a marathon of Dick Van Dyke programs, mini marathon of the old Dick Van Dyke Show in honor of Carl Reiner. Did you meet Carl Reiner?
Yes, on a few occasions actually. I've interviewed him. Yeah,
and that must have been during the time he was working with Steve Martin.
Yeah, it probably would have been. Yeah,
yeah,
that era.
Yeah,
in the '80s, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you recall about Carl Reiner? Anything in particular?
You know something? He was always trying to be funny. I mean, he always was funny. He always had a natural way about him, you know, natural funniness. But any question that you asked him, he tried to turn into a funny story or a joke, or you know. And he was a very nice man, very candid. It's funny when you a lot of actors when you're talking to them are trying to present themselves in a certain way. So when you're asking them questions, sometimes they're cautious, they're stiff, they're not very candid about what they're. Well, you got guys like Carl Reiner who, you know, he's seen it all, done it all. That, you know, he has no problem with telling you who he is, and he doesn't make any pretense of who he is. And it's always refreshing to actually talk to people like that.
When you were doing the Movie Loft, were there ever any Oscar night episodes? And did you guys ever do an Oscar celebration? Anything?
Every year we did Oscar night. Yeah, and I did a lot of other shows that were, you know, like Hersey's Hollywood.
Right.
We would do an Oscar week for Hersey's Hollywood as well. So we always did. And you know, a lot of these movies that we're talking about today were actually on Movie Loft, and I've talked about it on Movie Loft. Yeah, before.
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe they ever sent you to the Oscars.
Oh, I've been on the Oscars. I've been on the Oscars when you could stand on the red carpet. You can't do that anymore unless you are one of the major. I mean, you have to be one of the major network shows in order to get on the red carpet now. Now they just put you in the back room so that, you know, when people win the Oscar, you know, they come back in and it's a press conference. So you're sitting there. But I was, you know, in the early days when you could actually stand on the red carpet, and they, you know, because you've interviewed a lot of these people, if they could see your face, that was one thing you had an advantage if you were a Hollywood reporter, as I was, that, you know, they could recognize you as opposed to just a reporter that a lot of stations would send to stand on the carpet to interview Hollywood movie stars when they walked up the red carpet, because they didn't know those people. Whereas they could recognize your face, you know, and you could actually yell out to them and get them to come over to you. So, I mean, there was a day when they even walked up without their publicist, and that never happens now. But, you know, today, in those days, they didn't even walk up with their publicist anywhere near them. So you could ask them anything, they would talk about anything. They looked great, you know. But then the Oscars in those days weren't that political either. They were not, you know, other than Marlon Brando, of course, refusing his Oscar for The Godfather by sending in an American Indian to accept it on behalf of Native Americans, I should say.
It always comes back to Marlon Brando. Well, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. March looks like it's going to be a great month. I'm Don Stradley. This is Dana Hersey. Dana, will you do me the honors and sign us out?
Don Stradley, I'm Dana Hersey with the Film Loft. Good night.
Thank you.
All right.
All right,
pal.
Dana.
Always a pleasure.
All right. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Take care.
Bye-bye.